Welcome to Khanversations. I'm Muqtedar Khan, your host, and today with us we have a very distinguished guest who is, fortunately for me and you, a second-time guest on Khanversations. It's Lieutenant General Hasnain, and he's here to talk about the recent visit of the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin. We will talk about his visit and what it means for U.S.-India partnership in the defense sector. But before we begin, please do the needful, subscribe to Khanversations, like the video, ring the bell icon, and after you've watched it, do remember to share it with your friends and colleagues. General Sahab, welcome to Khanversations. I'm deeply honored that you have come on our show.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure always to be with you.
And for those of you, I mean, it's impossible that anybody in India does not know of General Hasnain, but he's currently the Chancellor of Central University of Kashmir, and he ended his career as Secretary of the Military, a very important position in the Indian Armed Forces. Sir, so Lloyd Austin was in the United States on the 4th and 5th, was in India on the 4th and 5th of June. I hear that Jake Sullivan is also coming next. There seems to be a lot of hectic dialogue and discussions going on between the US and India with regards to defense. And in fact, now there's a new word that has popped up, defense industrial cooperation between the US and India. So I want to get your first impressions on Secretary Austin's visit. What do you think of it, its significance, and what really came out of it?
Well, firstly, it's a pleasure to be on your show. And at such a contextual time when lots is happening in IndoUS relations. As to your question per se, I would say the driver is, of course, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Washington, the second state visit to Washington as such. And behind it also is the recently concluded ShangriLa Dialogue in Singapore. Obviously, year and 4 months down the line after the start of the Ukraine war, there is stock taking which is going on at the moment. This war can perpetuate for very long. It had the potential of setting back relations. India was neutral, so to say, but now the United States and India both are realizing that the war itself cannot be allowed to pull back the relationship. This relationship has to only progress. And that's why you're seeing the range of activities in Quad, the expressions in the ShangriLa Dialogue, and of course, now the visit of the Defense Secretary here. Incidentally, Indo-US relations as a strategic partnership for some time has now no longer been restricted to either foreign relations or a defense or a military relationship. It is a 2+2 relationship. And that's a very, very important aspect. I think 2017, I attended the second dialogue in Delhi itself as a delegate and spoke there also. I was honored to speak there. And I think that relationship has only to be taken forward. The pandemic and the subsequent war in Ukraine have both acted as dampeners in this process. And I think there's a realization, the sentiment in both the capitals is clear today that we have to get over that and take this relationship beyond.
Sir, you did mention the Shangri-La conference, and I was a bit surprised that India's defense minister skipped it. In fact, he skipped it 2 years in a row. So I actually did a briefing on my show on Shangri-La's dialogue, and I spoke about Secretary Austin and General Li Shangfu's sort of confrontational exchanges at the conference. But I was wondering, why does India skip the Shangri-La Dialogue? Is there any reason, or just oversight, or they're too busy?
Somehow, for a couple of years now, maybe about 5-6 years ago, the Indian presence was fairly strong at the Shangri-La Dialogue. And we did make many statements there. But somehow in the last couple of years, we have shied away from it, especially after April 2020, when all this happened on the Ladakh border. We have been a little tentative on it because perhaps it is for India, it's more a wait and watch kind of a policy which is going on, particularly in relation to Sino-Indian relations. And we don't want to perhaps go there and make statements. And then you get queried by all kinds of correspondents, media people, etc. And there are sideline issues which take place there. So you know that India has actually been conducting its foreign policy in a much quieter kind of a way, and particularly when there is a change taking place. I consider the furthering of the IndoUS strategic partnership as change in progress, which is carrying on. Perhaps India would, although we've got a foreign minister who's extremely articulate, we've got a foreign minister who sets the pace in many ways in other places. But I think broadly the idea is to avoid any public kind of a formulation at this moment, wait and watch, multilateralism, middle path. That is the policy which is being followed by India. And that's one of the reasons why we are perhaps shying away from the ShangriLa Dialogue. I have no doubt that we will be there in the near future. We had the presence of some of our intelligence chiefs there, some other government officials there, that their presence was very much there. But at the policy-making level, ministerial level, I agree with you, this was something it was missing.
So one of the interesting things that has happened here in the US is that in the current budget of the US defense budget, there are specific allocations for the United States, for India. One of them is essentially an investment in what is called as ICET, the Initiative on Critical Emerging Technologies, and also a research project. Like there is money if you want to research on how to wean India off dependence on Russian technology. So if you look at the current offering, and I think the biggest thing that's going to come out of Prime Minister Modi's visit to the White House on a state visit in 2 weeks' time, is the signing of the jet engines deal, the General Electric's F414, which will then help Tejas Mark II, etc. But do you, as a former Indian personnel, do you fear that we are just exchanging military dependence, exchanging Russia for the US? Is that what is happening here?
You see, India is following a policy of self-reliance, of attaining self-reliance. Atmanirbharta, as it's called, you're aware of it. But a nation which initiates such a process, it does take a time to achieve its terminal ends. I can quote you from figures. For example, 4,682 crores was worth our exports about 6 years ago. It's gone up to about 15,000 crores in 2022-23, which is a fairly good rise, but not exponential rise as such that we could expect. So in the interim that we are looking at, the time when we're looking at 2047, but the interim period up to 2047, I think we will be critically dependent a lot on international aid, means technical aid. Earlier we were the Russians in terms of our defense supplies, but that route seems to be drying up, particularly after our experience with the S-400, where you find at least two units worth of systems have not come in from the signed contracts. Obviously, India is getting a little concerned about it. And it is natural that it would happen. Sino-Russian relationship interests seem to be coinciding much more. And India could start getting sidelined from the Russian focus to a great extent. And therefore, the Indian multilateral approach is now veering towards having a more US-heavy kind of an approach. And it's not that we are going to dry up everything on the Russian side. That is has been a very, very reliable supply line, no doubt, and different contingencies. In the case of the United States, that hasn't been there. If you remember the sanctions which came on us in 1998, after India went overtly nuclear and things like that. So these things are all there in memory. But the time has come when India has to step out now and start taking decisions on this. And I think that is what is exactly happening at the moment. These are the beginnings of that. Critical technology is coming our way. And now with ICET, as you say correctly, this is the time to exploit it. But India is always a tentative player on strategic issues. We do not like to go whole hog anywhere. We do not like taking decisions which are going to drastically change our foreign policy in any way. It's been a history. It's not with any one particular government. It's been with all governments in India. And I tend to support that because, we live in a very turbulent kind of an environment. A single decision can upset a lot of things around us, which we may not be able to anticipate at that time. So we are taking our decisions quietly, slowly, but quite surely. And I think this particular visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi to Washington is a very, very critical visit. It is the cementing of what started with President Barack Obama, his relationship with Mr. Barack Obama. Mr. Modi has been able to get along famously with 3 American presidents, not a major problem. But I do recall that this whole process actually started in 2005, with the visit of the then Defense Minister, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee. I can recall the date, 18th of July, when he perhaps spoke at the RAND Corporation, where he outlined certain issues of India's concerns and things like that. That was the time when the beginnings of those very famous 3 components of the Indo-US defense relationship came about, and the process started. If you remember, BECA, B-E-C-A, BECA, which is essentially the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, COMCASA, which is the Communication Compatibility and Security Agreement, and LEMOA, the Logistics Agreement between us. They were the 3 critical ones, which all finally fructified only by 2020-21, finally. And I think now, therefore, with that fructification, our interoperability capabilities between the US Armed Forces and the Indian Armed Forces now, the time is now ripe to step beyond. And I think you very correctly assessed that ICT, or available of ICT, is going to make a critical difference.
Even though this is not discussed or reported much in Indian press, but a few months ago, there was lots of discussion of it in the US press, that the BECA was finalized in October of 2020. And this is after the Galwan episode. Galwan happened in June. And then when the Arunachal Pradesh event happened, India was much, much more prepared and was able to respond to the Chinese incursion. The cat upstairs, that's Kismet.
That's satellite, that's the basic thing. Satellite communication surveillance, which was so critical for this whole thing.
Yeah, and our press was reporting that the reason why India was so prepared and was able to respond is because of BECA and the fact that the US was providing real-time intelligence to India. So we do have at least one significant example of real on the battleground kind of advantage that India has gained.
Absolutely.
From the strategic.
That's a very important example which you have just quoted, because I do remember when Galwan happened and the follow-up after that, there was a tremendous amount of doubt that we had in our minds of all kinds of satellite images which were emerging. And today with artificial intelligence, you can find there will be attempts at deception, lots of morphing and things like that. Pink tents coming up and black tents coming up. And here we were making all kinds of assessments based upon that, because there was nothing reliable about the satellite communication that we were getting at that time. But subsequently, with this agreement and the American reliability, the dependability factor, it made a huge difference in the case as you just quoted, as far as the Arunachal incident was concerned.
So, many years ago, I think around 2002 and 3, just when the sanctions were being lifted around 2005, one of my classmates from Georgetown, who was a Navy commander, approached me and wanted my feedback on a proposal that he had, and he wanted to share satellite intel with India and Pakistan, and basically to say the images that we have will help you avoid confusion and shooting each other, even though each of you might be within your own borders, because the borders are so zigzag. It is quite possible you might think that the enemy is behind the lines when actually the enemy is still in his territory. So he wanted to sell these images. And so I said, okay, I gave him some briefings. And a few months later, when I met with him, I said, "What happened? Did you pull it off?" He was hoping that that would, get him a promotion, and he wanted to get out of the submarine and come back to land. And he said, "No." Both the countries said no. Apparently, both India and Pakistan didn't trust the U.S. To give them good intel, and they thought that the U.S. could use these intel images, etc., to manipulate and might even trigger. So I was amazed at the level of suspicion of US intentionalities. So my question to you is, given the traditional suspicion of the US and its imperial policies going all the way back to 71 and before, do you think that there is a greater trust in the US now in the Indian strategic community, in the military, and in the government?
Yes, I would be very positive on that and say it has enhanced over the last 10 years in particular, 2013-14 onwards. Definitely, I would say from the time of the Indo-US nuclear deal, this is something which played upon Indian sentiments in a very big way. India did not expect, perhaps the strategic community in India did not expect this. And the subsequent labeling of George Bush as the most pro-Indian US president for years and things like that, that created a very, very positive environment. Not that it was complete trust. The good old statement of the ugly American is always there, right? That little suspicion is always there, which goes back to the 60s. It will take a couple of generations to overcome that. But definitely on the strategic front, greater exchanges were taking place, and there was greater transparency, more openness. It happens when the military communities start interacting with each other. I've been to the United States a couple of times on military exchange programs. I've been to Hawaii. I've been to the Asia Pacific Center and did a long executive strategic course for almost 4.5, 5 months. Obviously all this contributes tremendously. This was exactly the process which in the manner in which the US-Pakistan relationship actually flourished. Right from 47, 48 onwards and beyond, when all those groupings came up, CETO, CENTO and things like that. And Pakistan was always considered as our boys, the people with the Americans at that time. I always quote this example that if I'm in an international environment and I'm standing with the Indian delegation is standing and you have the Pakistani delegation standing, the American armed forces personnel will invariably gravitate to the Pakistanis first and shake their hands. They will not come to the Indians. That's because that relationship goes back to those times. No, you have to beat this. You have to overcome this. It has to be an Indo-US relationship which can be of such great trust that we start seeing the Americans now looking at India as an asset, in the same manner in which they looked at Pakistan as an asset, and perhaps continue to look at Pakistan today. I'm sure the United States has the vision to ensure that the geostrategic location of Pakistan is always appreciated by the strategic community there. So I do think while we have overcome this to a great extent, there is still a long way to go. A long, long way to go on this.
The Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania is about 50 miles from my house. And every summer I go there for a seminar, and outside of the college, there are all the names of the alumni. And I haven't found a single Indian name there, but there are very prominent Pakistani generals. And even General Sisi of Egypt got his master's degree from the Army War College. So yes, I understand that this.
I can correct that perception. I can correct that perception from the angle that we have had in the last 15 or 20 years, at least 3 army chiefs in India who have been graduates of the Army War College, Carlisle.
Okay.
General V.K. Singh
Okay, very good.
Was a graduate of that. General Bikram Singh was a graduate of Carlisle, and General Bipin Rawat, the late General Bipin Rawat, was himself. No, I think he was of Fort Leavenworth, not of the U.S. War College. But we have had a large number. When General C.C. attended the Army War College, Carlisle, I know that a very good friend of mine, General Anil Chet from India, attended the same program, because he speaks very extensively of his relationship with General C.C. So there are a lot. Every year we have one person from India always at the U.S. War College and the National Defense University at Washington.
This summer, I'll make it a point to take photographs of those, and I'll search for them and then share it with my community. I didn't know that there were so many Indian generals who had already visited the Army War College. It is a very good institution. Sir, I want to ask in real terms, really, besides the development of the trust between the two countries and all these, COMCASA, LEMOA, BECA, ICET treaties, etc. They seem like a lot of alphabet soups. But in real terms, really, is the US just looking at India as, India is now the biggest defense importer. So is behind all this talk of strategic partnership, etc., is India just a market? The biggest defense market for the biggest defense manufacturer in the world. Maybe is that the natural thing? I think we have bought about 20, we sold, I don't remember the exact period, whether India bought over a period of time about $20 billion worth of defense equipment from the United States. But with these engines that are going to be formalized, they will be fitted in more than 150 jets, fighters, and subsequently India might even be allowed to export these modified and improved jet engines, the 414s from General Electric. So is this also primarily driven by the defense market, or is it essentially a strategic need given the rise of China?
I think it's both. You can't classify and say that this is due to one. Obviously, the United States is the third largest supplier of defense hardware to India after Russia and France, primarily. But there is no doubt that ever since 1991, there has been an exponential increase in the perceptual understanding of the United States of India's strategic importance. This fact of the Indian Ocean, the crown of the Indian Ocean, the jutting out peninsula, the ports that we have here. The Indian Navy may not be as strong today, but I can assure you 25 years down the line, it will be something which is quite different. Not matching the PLA Navy or the US Navy itself, but it would be something which would be in a position to be able to interact on equal terms with the United States Navy. We started the Malabar program, if you remember.
Yeah,
the exercise Malabar program in 1991-92. This is the oldest IndoUS cooperation program, which is still on an annual basis, which is continuing. I think all this came to a head because post the Cold War, the United States realized that from the European theater, everything had to shift into the Asia-Pacific, then Asia-Pacific, now the Indo-Pacific. And in that, India would form a very important component because of the fact that west of the Straits of Malacca and east of the Suez Canal and the Persian Gulf, it is basically Indian landmass, which is most important, and the waters around India, which are most important because that's the area through which the energy, sea lines of communication of energy and finished container goods, everything seems to be going from in that direction. And it's for this reason. You see, the ability of, if push comes to shove with China, between the United States and China, I don't envisage a full-scale war taking place anytime in the future, near future. But if it has to happen, one of the only ways by which China can be strangulated is through the Indian Ocean. And the United States and India, by that time in a relationship which is much stronger, Japan, Australia, the AUKUS, some of the Southeast Asian countries, ASEAN countries put together would strangulate China completely. China is virtually, if you ask me, from a definition angle, is a landlocked country. Although the whole Pacific lies to its east, but it's a landlocked country because all the markets and all the areas of strategic concern actually lie in the Indian Ocean and beyond, not in the Pacific. And therefore, the routes which are coming to them are all vulnerable. These are all vulnerable routes which are open to strangulation by inimical navies of the world. This is one thing which I always explain to my students whenever I'm speaking to them, that one of the biggest mistakes which the Chinese perhaps made in 1978 when they came up with 4 modernizations was that the 4th priority was given to the armed forces. That was fine. But in the 4th priority, they gave the first priority to the PLA, army, and not to the navy. The navy should have been given the priority. By now, the PLA navy would have been perhaps matching the US navy. It will take them 20 years more to catch up.
Well, one of the things I think they have not understood, there's this word that we use here quite a bit called blue water navy. And this is something even the Mughals did not understand, that the navy was so critical. The reason why England governed India and the Mughals didn't govern England is because of navy. We didn't have navy. And in those days, navy was just a ship with some cannons on it and a few soldiers. It was easy to construct, to have this blue water navy to project power. I tell my students jokingly that if we fight with China, we should fight in Argentina, because China will have no capacity to even bring its forces to the battleground, whereas the US is so capable of
that is the very reason, which very correctly you appreciate, that's the very reason why Gwadar, Chabahar, and Djibouti are all so important to the Chinese, because the PLA Navy, in the garb of anti-piracy operations, has actually established its bases in these locations, not Chabahar so far, but yes, Djibouti and Gwadar. And it's looking to extend this into Chabahar in the future if its relationship with Iran goes as strong as the manner in which it is progressing at the moment. So the Chinese have a very strong presence in the northwest Indian Ocean, in the area of the top end of the Arabian Sea. But you can't yet classify them as a truly blue water navy, the manner in which you can classify the US Navy, perhaps.
I want to talk a little bit more about China. Clearly, the distance between the US and India is reducing in direct proportion to the distance between India and China is increasing. So there is this direct relationship. But to what extent have we reached the turning point where there is no way to go back to a more stable relationship with China, where Chinese threat does not dictate India's security policies and India's trade policies? Or have we already crossed the no-return point, and is it time to just essentially assume that there is a very subtle arms race going on, and also an attempt to contain China's aggression in this region?
You see, we just spoke about the Indo-US relationship and the trust factor.
Yeah.
Somehow in most of our discussions on China, we never speak of the Sino-Indian relationship and the trust factor. There is an utter trust deficit in the Sino-Indian relationship. The Chinese, first of all, it's not clear to both sides. It's not clear. Are we partners? Are we friends? Are we enemies? Are we competitors? No one can really classify as to where we are, right? So everything, there's a mix and match of everything put together, and that leads to this huge trust deficit. The Chinese firmly believe that the Indians would not like to see the rise of China, right? And they look at China, the rise of China 2049, the strongest part of the world, etc. And they see India as one of those countries, Japan perhaps the other, which has the potential to be effective competitors and something which could dilute China's rise. So having done that, they would like to browbeat, reduce your confidence, prevent you from having the kind of aspirations that which are natural to a nation as large as India and as the potential which India has got. The relationship has been based upon this trust deficit. And the Chinese would not like to see you develop. So I think the relationship has reached a point today where it's going to be very, very difficult to retrieve it at the moment. I think something very drastic happens in the world. I can't even think about what that drastic thing could be. So with that, there is no doubt that all actions of China today are focused on a few countries, which they think have the potential to curb in China's rise. Japan being one of them, South Korea being the other, and of course for other interests' sake, Vietnam, Indonesia, and things like that. But India, because of its geographical location, geostrategic location, is perhaps considered one of the most important. Taiwan is, I'm not even looking at Taiwan as an issue in this. This is purely between India and China and India's geostrategic location. From that angle, the Chinese would always want us to be second best, to keep us curbed, to let our aspirations be many shades below theirs. But in the process, they also realize that they are pushing us deeper and deeper into a relationship with the United States and the West. Perhaps that is acceptable to them. In their vision of things and their perception, perhaps they think that India may not go the whole hog. And some of these actions which keep taking place on the borders, etc., the perpetuation of this conflict on the borders at the LAC, not giving us even the maps of their perception of what their line of actual control is, and things like that, is all proves that what they want is a perpetuation of this issue. Otherwise, they've resolved their border problems with almost all countries except Bhutan and India, and they're in the process of resolving it with Bhutan also. But in the case of India, it is perpetuation which is part of their strategy. And therefore, you are going to see this bit of, standoffs between India and China from time to time only increasing.
I don't understand the wisdom of that attitude, because it does two things. One, it makes India spend more on defense and become stronger. And the second thing is it sends India deeper and deeper into the Western camp. And I don't see either of the two developments as in any way advancing the Chinese interest.
I don't think the Chinese ever intend to go to war with India. That's been my strong conviction somehow. It is only what is called wolf warrior diplomacy, which they followed in 2020. A little bit of browbeating, a little bit of intimidation, lots and lots of strategic communication to cow you down, show you in poorer light, and things like that. An odd incident here and there. So far, we've not had an incident on the high seas anyway. I do foresee that something like this will happen as we go along in the near future. We've had 18 meetings of our corps commanders in Ladakh without coming to anything. Of course, marginal withdrawals have taken place here and there. That too with the leaving areas of buffer zones in between, etc. But the main areas, Depsang and places like that, no, there's been no movement. And the most important thing of 1993 Peace and Tranquility Agreement of exchange of maps with perceptions of what is your perception of the claim lines that you have, that has never been given to us. And each time this demand is put to them, we make sure that this demand is always put down in writing and given to them, but they have not come back on it.
Yeah, you're right. In fact, at the ShangriLa Dialogue, I was kind of amazed at the condescending remarks that the Chinese defense minister made about India and India's capability and lack of modernization of Indian forces. I thought that was childish, to say the least.
Absolutely. And the Chinese are used to be doing this. I think a lot has been spoken about their strategic communication in the past, where people have praised the fact that they understand strategic communication very well. They are one of the few countries which took lessons from the first Gulf War when CNN, entered into your drawing rooms, and they were the ones who came out with the first doctrine of war under informationized conditions. But at the end of the day, today, as you very correctly surmise, I think that strategic communication is extremely childish. and it's not giving them any dividends at all.
One last question. In the US, sometimes when you listen to, say, Kishore Mehbubani come and lecture here, give a couple of lectures at Harvard and other places explaining how the world will be when China becomes number one. And then there are others also, like Professor Mearsheimer, who have asked the question whether China's rise will be peaceful or not. So there is a huge segment in the West which kind of assumes the inevitability of the rise of China and the dominance of China. So the question is this transition to a China-dominated world going to be peaceful, or is that going to be, full of conflict, especially with the US trying its best to retain its own global hegemony? So how do you see that? Do you see that rise of China as inevitable?
2049 is what they have set their aspirations at, with 100 years. An achievement of the creation of the current China as it is today. I don't think 2049, 26 years from now, is a benchmark at which they will be able to achieve what they are setting out to achieve. Lots and lots of literature is now emerging in the strategic environment, telling us that the US economy may not get overtaken by the Chinese economy till very long, and if at all. Many cases it's also being said if at all, because there is no inevitability about it. It seems that from all the strategic communication emanating from China, it seems as if there's an inevitability about it, and the Chinese will overtake the American economy and things like that. I don't fully agree with that. Secondly, as far as peaceful rise is concerned, the United States is contesting it. And although we've had recent visits as late as yesterday of American officials going to Beijing and some talks going on there, etc., these are all to soften the kind of exchanges which have taken place at this ShangriLa Dialogue and places like that. And the United States is keen to, at the same time, ensure that this rise remains peaceful. But if push comes to shove, and Taiwan is the issue, I think, which is going to be the trigger, because I think 2035, Xi Jinping's ambitions would probably be pegged to 2035, and he will be 82 years old. That's, I think, around the age when Mao Zedong died also.
Yeah.
And that's the age which he will probably be contemplating, that this is the time when he would like to leave a legacy of a great China, achieved under the leadership of President Xi Jinping. This is a dangerous thing. This 2023 to 2035 period is a dangerous period because of the leadership of Xi Jinping and his ambitions. That could lead to confrontation, which I think the United States is trying to avoid. It's trying to avoid it, soft pedal it to a great extent. But somewhere down the line, mistakes are going to be made. Taiwan, you'll find the US will also make its efforts, like we found the visit of the US Speaker of the House of the Congress also making a visit. That was intimidation. That was actual intimidation which took place at that time. But the United States is used to it and perhaps will continue doing it. Because without that, the Chinese perception of themselves is going to go stronger and stronger. And I foresee that this period up to 2035 is the dangerous period that we should be concerned about.
Yeah, sir, I wanted to share an interesting piece of information with you. I was working in Mumbai in the corporate world, and when I decided to apply for the US, I had to quit my job and come to Hyderabad. So I started consulting. So there was a consultant in Hyderabad who said, "Muqtedar, can you manage my clients for 6 months?" I said, "Perfect," because 6 months was my time for leaving. So when I asked him, "Why aren't you attending to your clients?" he says, "I'm writing a book." And I said, "What was the book?" This is 1991. And he said, "This book is going to be about the decline of the US economy." I remember that. I've been hearing these stories about the decline of the US economy all my life, and it is still the biggest. Right now, one of the more interesting issues is changing demographics. So for example, China has a billion people advantage over the US now. But 50 years down the line, the difference will be just 300 million. In the sense, China is projected to come down to 750 million, and the US will be around 450. And with our productivity, I think.
Absolutely. That's a very important point that you make. In demographics is something, the Russian, for example, from 144 million will come down to about 110, 115 million. Yeah. So this is something which most of these countries, so-called advanced countries of the world, will have to be concerned about. And the US, you're absolutely right. In a couple of years, will be at about 400 million plus, and that advantage will be there. And who can take away the US advantage on technology? It's not as if the Chinese are catching up tomorrow on technology. I think the last issue which I'd like to just raise here also is Ashley Tellis and his perception on the trustworthiness of India. I'm surprised a man like Ashley Tellis is actually saying it. India will always look to its interests, like any other nation. In strategic affairs, it's always a question of my interests first. And therefore, I think it's an unfair one which Ashley Tellis has put on, because India has proven to be an effective partner so far in what the United States has expected of India. If the United States expects that India will go to war with China to achieve American ends, I'm sorry, that is not going to happen anytime in the future.
I think the language in Washington is very dabdaba. I don't know with regards to India. When you talk to diplomats, they will tell you off the record that they think that India has a very thin skin, and so they do not want to be too critical. But there is a growing perception among some people, and this is a very small community, that perhaps India is kind of a free rider on the US. It wants US technology, it wants US aid, it wants US support, it wants the US to help it get a permanent seat in the second. But what will India offer to the US is not very concrete in that sense. So people are saying,
I wish I could enter that debate with those people anytime. What the United States gets is India's geostrategic location, which is what Pakistan has given to China, to the United States in a big way. As far as Russia was concerned, the Soviet Union was concerned. You remember the soft underbelly of the Soviet Union, the access into Central Asia, etc. Here, sitting at the crown of the Indian Ocean, the rim of the Indian Ocean, this entire area, a control over it by a friendly power such as India. What more would the United States want out of this?
So it was wonderful talking to you, and we will continue this conversation. And perhaps maybe you should write a response to Ashley Tellis' essay.
Lots of them have been written in Delhi. Yes, I agree. I agree. I should write this, and I will attempt to write it.
Yes. In the near future. So thank you very much for your precious time.
Pleasure, absolutely. And it's been a pleasure, absolutely. And Khanversations is hugely appreciated here. I have put it out on many of my groups, and lots of people have commented very favorably on it.
Thank you very much, sir. That was very nice to hear. And General Saab, thank you very much for joining us. And those of you who have clearly enjoyed this conversations, please, if you have not subscribe to Khanversations, like the video. Remember to share it with your colleagues. And thank you very much, sir. Once again.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. All the best.